We're holding on 35a, and we've been learning the wording in the Torah for esrog is, I can't really say it's based on the psukim, on the pasuk Pri Eitz Hadar, because in a certain sense, it's really a tradition. We know what it is. But the Gemara, the rabbis in the Gemara wanted to find it, at least hinted to, from the wording, Pri Eitz Hadar, that it refers to an esrog. So it's not like they didn't know what it refers to. We do know. We have there's never been, the tradition never was stopped. It's been continuing from the time of Moshe Rabbeinu. So we definitely know what it is. But the thing is that the Torah uses vague words to tell us the esrog. So how do we translate those words into esrog? So one of the explanations is that it was Pri Eitz Hadar means Tam Eitzoi Uperioi Shaveh, that it has the same flavor of the fruit and the eitz, the wood, or the bark. It has the same flavor as the fruit, and that was one interpretation. And the Gemara said about pilpulin, maybe peppercorns, maybe that would be also a case where you have the same flavor. And the Gemara answered that they're too small, and if you want to use a few of them, that wouldn't fit because it says all you need is one. And bottom line was that it's can't be that; it must be the esrog. The next opinion was Rebbe Yomer. Rebbe says that the Pri Eitz Hadar could be read as dir, hadir, not hadar, but hadir, the pen or the corral, which of sheep, and basically in such a location you have big sheep and small sheep, and sheep that are solid, shalem, complete, some that are balmum, they have blemishes. So the understanding is that the same thing would be that the Pri Eitz, which is similar to such a pen of sheep, would be with big ones and small ones and damaged ones and non-damaged ones, and that would be the esrog. And the Gemara says, what do you mean all fruits are like that? Sometimes they grow big, some grow small, some grow blemished, some grow complete. So why would this imply an esrog? And the Gemara answered, no, we don't mean big and small. We mean old ones from previous year or previous seasons, and young ones that have just grown. And that this is a tree where the old ones still stay on the tree and they don't become moldy or rotted. They don't fall off. They stay on the tree and they grow with it throughout the seasons and continue. And they don't fall. They don't fall from the tree. So it would be similar to a deer, similar to a corral where you have young ones that are just born. And
let's talk about this guy, Philadelphia Sports.
And you have old ones that are from previous years, and they're all in the same corral, and therefore it would be similar to a deer. And in that sense, you only have this by an esrog, or it's not something common by other trees that they stay on the tree. You have the old ones from previous years still on the tree while the new ones are growing. So that's the second interpretation of the esrog, the Pri Eitz Hadar, meaning an esrog. Then the Gemara gives a third interpretation, and it's very similar to the second, except that it's relying on the word hadar in a different way, not because of that it could be read hadir, but it could be read hadar. Instead of hadar, it's hadar. Hadar makes the hay, when you read it hadar, you make the hay into a prefix, and the main word is dar. The initial assumption, which is the normal way of reading the word, is hadar is one word with a root of three letters. And the way we're translating it now is dar, which is the root is a two letters, dar, And the hay is a is what you mean. The hay is a prefix. Now the other interpretation is that the word hadar comes from the word hydration or idor. Oh, okay, fine. Okay. So hadar is from the word hydration, and the hydration is basically unique about an esrog, that an esrog needs to have extra water. It's not enough for an esrog to have just rainwater. It's not enough for it just to be watered. It basically relies on both. So I don't know if anyone here has tried to plant an esrog tree, but it sounds to me like it uses a lot more water than any other tree. So that was the understanding from the word of hadar, is from a Greek word, which is called lashon yavani, which is gadol al kol mayim. In other words, idor, which I think is based on the English word of hydration, it's basically means that it has a lot of water used in order for it to grow properly. So that is the fourth interpretation of esrog. Then comes the next Gemara. The next Gemara talks about the other cases of the Mishnah. And the next case of the Mishnah is Shel Hashera. So we're on page 35a, and we are probably 25 lines from the top. Let's see, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, maybe 27 lines from the top of the page on 35a. So we're learning that the Ashera and Ir Hanidachas, such an esrog is puzzle, is invalid. If it's from the Ashera, these are trees that are going to be burned, or it's not they were worshipped as for idol worship, at least Ashera, and the Yerani Dachas is it happens to be in the city that's going to be destroyed, going to be burned because of idol worship. So the law is that the esrog from such a tree is puzzle, and the Gemara wants to know why. My time. The Gemara says, my time, kivan de l'sreifa koi, because it is going to be burned, so therefore, katuse michtas shiure, its measure has been crushed. And because it's been crushed, it's as if it's already been burned, and all you have is dust or ashes. And this does not have the shear of an esrog. Which is obviously an interesting idea, because what is the shear of an esrog? The shear of an esrog that we know is, what did we learn? Has to be like the size of a walnut, at least, or the size of an egg. But what's the reason for that? The reason for that is that the reason that it has to be the size of an egg is because it has to be a finished fruit. It has to be ripened, completed its growth. So here, and this is it's a little complicated, because is there really a measure for an esrog? The Mishnah says there is, but the Mishnah is basing it not because there's really a measure for an esrog. The Mishnah that says that there's a minimum size is for a side reason. The side reason is it has to be completed its growth, not because intrinsically an esrog has a size to it. Maybe an esrog doesn't have any limited minimum size, but it needs to. But the concept is that it has to be completed its growth. In what stage is it completed its growth? So either a walnut or a egg, but that's like a side point. In other words, it's not about having a minimum size; it's about having completed its growth. So if you have an esrog that is that is considered as if it's burned and it doesn't have any size to it, that doesn't mean it didn't complete its growth. It did complete its growth. Just happens to be missing. It happens to be considered as if it's burned. So therefore, if there was a minimum size for an esrog, this would not fit that bill. But here, it's not really about a minute. There is no minimum size. So the fact that we consider it as if it's burnt, because since it's going to be burnt, like a shera tree or a irani dachas, they have to be burned. We consider it as if it's already burned, and therefore it's as if it doesn't have any measure. Okay, but an esrog maybe doesn't need a measure, and maybe there's no problem. Is it complete? Did it complete its growth? Yeah, it completed its growth. Is it considered as if it's burned? Yeah. But there's no size, there's no minimum size for an esrog. So what's the problem? By a shofar needs to have a size. It has to be a tefach, right? So if a shofar is not a tefach, then we have a problem. A lulav needs to be 3 tefachim, 4 tefachim. The hadas and arab, they have certain sizes. Esrog, what's the minimum size of an esrog? It has to be grown. If it grew, that's its minimum size. It's fully grown. It's considered as if it's burned. Okay, it doesn't have the minimum size, but it doesn't. But there is no minimum size. It's completely grown, and there's no minimum size for an esrog. So Tosfos and the Rosh, they want to say that there is a minimum size also, even though our Mishnah talks about the minimum size based on the fact that it has to be fully grown. But we also see in our Gemara earlier, this page a little earlier, that there is a size for an esrog, because it has to be minkara. It has to be recognizable. So if it has to be recognizable, therefore, what comes out is that if it's not recognizable, that means that it's not minimum size. And so, is there really a size for an esrog? This is the question on this Gemara. Is there a minimum size for an esrog? The Gemara implies like there is. The way we learned the Gemara previously, at least on page 31, is that there is no minimum size for an esrog. It's based on the fact that the esrog has to be fully grown, and the fact that our Gemara implies that there is a minimum size. So the commentaries say it must be because of this other concept, that there's a concept of minkara. It has to be recognizable It has to be recognizable that it's an esrog. It has to be recognizable. Now, so this is the way they understand it, that there is a minimum size for an esrog, and if you have this esrog that's from an ashera or any dachas considered as if it's burned, it doesn't have that minimum size. Now, what comes out from here is that if you think about it now, and this is a question that I have on Tosfos and on the Rosh, is it really small, this esrog? No, it's a big esrog, but we consider it as if it's small. And the Gemara is saying, you know what? It's not going to be kosher. Why? Because it's considered as if it's burned. It's considered as if it's crushed, and it doesn't have the minimum size. But think about it. It doesn't have the minimum size. And the minimum size is that it has to be recognizable. This esrog, you want to tell me it's not recognizable? It's physically big. It has a law that it's considered as if it's small. What's the concept of recognizable? The fact that it has to be recognizable is the fact that people have to be able to see it. If people have to be able to see it, that should make a difference if it's considered as if there's a halacha that it has to be a certain size, and halacha says that this is not called an esrog that's this size because it's considered as if it's burned, and the halacha says it has a minimum size, fine. But if the minimum size is that it has to be recognizable, then who cares if it's considered as if it's not, as if it's burned? It's all about recognizable. The fact is, this is recognizable. You want to tell me that halachically it's considered as if it's burned? That shouldn't ruin the fact that it's recognized, not recognizable. It's recognizable. It's big enough to be recognizable. So what is Taisus really saying? That it's not that the fact that there's a minimum size, that the esrog has a minimum size, that means that it has to be recognized. The fact that it has to be recognizable means there has to be a minimum size. And the fact that it's considered as if it's burnt, it doesn't have that minimum size. What do you mean? It's recognizable.
Rebbe, it may be recognizable on a physical level, but maybe what Taisus is saying is because this is something so abhorrent and is so terrible, we don't even credit it with having any existence. You may see it, but it's not really there because for all intents and purposes, this is such a terrible thing that we consider it out of the dimension of size. Therefore, whatever it is, it's a pile of dust.
So what you're saying is correct, Isaac. That's what you have to come to. But what I'd like to explain is that this is really based on what we said earlier. We spoke yesterday that what is the minimum size of an esrog? Not what the minimum size. What does it mean to be minkara minkara, that it has to be recognizable? What's the reason for it? What's the reason it has to be recognizable? So one pshat was, it's like the title says, it has to be recognizable. That it's based on the pasuk. It says it has to be something recognizable. If you learn it from the pasuk, it makes it that there's a intrinsic law that the esrog needs to be a certain size. It says, it has to be, what's the size? It has to be recognizable size. We said a second interpretation. And the other interpretation was that it's based on a medrash, that it's all about showing to the world that we won against the mekatreg, against the accuser. We won in our judgment of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. We won. Didan Notzach. We won, and we tell everyone, we show everyone when we walk around with the lulav and the esrog, we show everyone that we won this judgment, and the accuser was silenced against us. The accuser was claiming that we don't have enough mitzvahs, we're just like the goyim, and the fact that we go around on Sukkahs with our lulav and esrog, it's recognizable to everyone that we won. Now, if it's all about the recognition that we show people, it would seem to me that my question is a very strong question. In other words, our Gemara here shows us that it's not about being recognizable to the world, because an esrog that's from an Asherah tree or an esrog that's from a Ir Hanidachas is recognizable to the world. It's considered as if it's burned, but physically, is it recognizable? It is. It's a big size. It's considered as if it's burned because it's going to be burnt ultimately. But is it a big size? Is it recognizable? Do people see that we won against the accuser on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur? They see that when we walk around with it. They see it's big enough. However, according to the other interpretation, that it's based on the pasuk, and the pasuk says there's a minimum size of an esrog. The minimum size is that it has to be recognizable, not because people have to see it, because intrinsically there's a halacha that it has to be a minimum size. So according to that shot, we now understand Tosfos in the Rush. What comes out from here is that the other interpretation we can't really say. because according to the other interpretation, you're stuck with a question over here. That the minimum size is all about recognition and recognizing it, and it is recognizable. It's very clear. But if you learn according to the way that we explained it, that it's based on the pasuk, then it's understandable. Isaac, did you get that? Okay. So it's like you're saying, it's just that you have to say it doesn't follow that other interpretation. Now, okay, so that's the understanding of this Gemara. There is an interesting point here I should just mention, and that is that there is another issue on the first day. The first day, in addition to being chatusei michtas shiure, that it doesn't have the minimum measure because it's considered as if it's burnt, it's just interesting to note that there's also an issue of it's not yours. It's not lochem. You can't consider yourself an owner of it. It's going to be burned. It's not considered that you have ownership of it. You can't call it lochem. We know that on the first day, and outside of Israel, some say even on the second day, it has to be yours, and that also would be a problem from an esrog that's from an Asherah and an Ir Hanidachas. That would also be a problem on the first day, additional reason. But the Gemara's reason applies throughout Sukkot, that there is a minimum size of a esrog, and if it's from an Asherah and Ir Hanidachas, it would not meet that minimum size. Now comes the next Gemara. The next Gemara is Shel Arla Puzzle. If it's from the first 3 years of a fruit tree, the esrog is invalid. Now, what is the reason for this? The Gemara says, my time. What is the reason? Why is it not acceptable? Why is it invalid? Pligi bar Reb Chia bar Ravin Reb Asi. Reb Chia bar Ravin and Reb Asi argue about this reason. At this point, the Gemara doesn't say who's who, which one holds what. We'll soon see in the Gemara that the Gemara can figure out that it must be that we can figure out who actually holds it. But in the meantime, we know there's an argument between Reb Chia bar Ravin and Reb Asi about what the reason is, and one of them says Chad Omar. One of them says L'fishein b'heter achila. There is no heter of eating it. That means that it's not going to be allowed to. We know arla, you can't benefit from, you can't eat, you can't benefit from it, and we know that the Torah says that the esrog and the daled minim, the 4 species, have to be yours, which the understanding is that you would need to be able to use. It has to be yours, fit for your use, and all types of benefits. And so since it's not able to be eaten, since it's not going to be able to be eaten, that means it's not really yours, and you won't be able to fulfill the mitzvah with it. Now, the Gemara then says the other reason. One of them says that the reason is because you're not allowed to benefit from it. Therefore, it does not have a law of having a value. It doesn't have a din mamay, a law of money, a monetary law to it, meaning it doesn't have a value to it. And it's not worth anything because it's asur bahana, it's prohibited for you to benefit from. And if something doesn't have any value to it, then you are not called an owner of it. The esrog needs to be yours, and because of that, it's because it doesn't have a value, it's not considered that you're the owner, which basically means anything that's prohibited in benefit, you sort of lose your ownership of it. Something that you're not allowed to benefit from, you can't be considered yours. Now, what it seems from here is that this applies only on the first day of Sukkot, because the law of Lachem would only apply on the first day. So that's an interesting thing that comes out, that the cases in the Mishnah are different. The Asherah Irani Dachas is not valid any of the days of Sukkot. The Orla would only be invalid because of would only be invalid because it doesn't have a monetary value to it. So that would be that would be different. In other words, the Mishnah gave different cases, but they're not all the same rules with regard to how many days you can't use it. You know, some are only also on the first day, some are also on the other days. Now there is another interpretation here, that an arla, something that's arla, is basically what do you do with arla? It's burned. So you could say the same thing here. The Ravid wants to learn that the same reason here is the reason of the previous Gemara as well. The way we learned the previous Gemara, that it was because of Sreifa, because it's Oimidli Hisaref, it's going to be, like the Gemara says, Tivan de la Sreifa Koy, it's going to be burned. So here also you could say that same reason. So based on that reason, it wouldn't be valid even for the other days of Sukkot. Basically, you don't have the measure of the minimum size of an esrog. You know, so you could say the same reason here. Now, of course, this is questionable. Is that really correct to say that it's because it's going to be burned, therefore it doesn't have a measure to it? There's no mitzvah to burn it with these. The others have a mitzvah to burn. So that seems to be what the argument is. If you can say it's, in other words, the way our Gemara doesn't mention those words, the Sreifakoi, Katusi Mechtas Shiure, and the way the commentaries seem to explain our Gemara right here about the Arla, that the way the commentaries are explaining it, that it's not based on the Sreifa, maybe because it's not there's no mitzvah to burn Arla. There's a mitzvah to burn the Irani Dachas and the Asherah tree, at least Asherah Shel Moshe, which we learned about in a few pages earlier. So there's a mitzvah to burn. Here, there's no mitzvah to burn, and maybe that's why these commentaries don't want to learn that that's the reason. The Ravid is learning that this is the reason. He's holding that even though it's not a mitzvah to burn, but it's oymid l'sreifa. Since it's oymid l'sreifa, it's standing to be burned. Who knows what else can you do with it? You're gonna burn it. So that would be enough to be considered that it doesn't have its measurement. It doesn't have a measure. Anyway, that seems to be what the commentaries are. So according to the Ravid, if it's because it's meant to be burned, it's gonna end up being burned, it doesn't have a measurement, that would be a reason why it would be invalid all the days of Sukkot. So according to the way we explained it, that the reason is not because of burn, but because it's not considered yours, because something that's prohibited to benefit from, you can't consider yourself an owner of, because there's nothing to own. It doesn't have a value. You're not owning anything. In such a thing, you can't claim as yours. That's applicable on the first days of Sukkot. But according to the reason of the Ravid, that the problem is that it's considered burned, that would be applicable even for the other days of Sukkot.
Could you give the orla away to non-Jews?
You know, that's a good question. Is that called benefit? Like, you're not allowed to benefit. Like, if you owe them a favor, you definitely can't.
We can give chametz away before Pesach. Not benefit from it.
Yeah, but what about if it's Asr B'Hana on Pesach? Can you give it away? No. Before Pesach, there's no Isser Hana. No prohibition of benefiting. Before Pesach, you could eat it yourself. You can give it away. You could eat it yourself even. But on Pesach, be Asr B'Hana, You want to know if you can give it away so you're not throwing it out. To benefit from, for sure you can't. You want to know, could you at least give it to someone that that you don't know, and you're never going to see them again, and you just feel like, why should I waste it? Can I benefit from it? I don't know. I don't think so, but I have to look it up.
Thank you.
So anyway, so the Gemara says that there's basically an argument here between Mechir Bar Rabban and Ravasi about ein ba heter achila or ein ba din mamay. If it doesn't have the heter of eating, or meaning that you don't have the ability to eat it, that might be the reason of arla. The first 3 years of a fruit tree, you can't eat. So therefore, the fruit you can't eat. So therefore, this esrog that's from arla, you will not be able to use for the daled minim because you can't eat it and it's not yours. And the other one, it says, doesn't have a value to it. It doesn't have a value to it. It's not worth a shava pruta. It doesn't have a din mamain. Doesn't have any value, and it's not called lachem. Rashi says that pretty clear. The first interpretation, Rashi says lachem haroi lachem b'chol darchi hana. Also, has to be fit. The esrog has to be fit. All types of benefits. And the second Rashi on this Gemara is in badin mamain enoy shava pruta. It doesn't have a value it doesn't have any value because it's iser hana. You can't call it lachem. So both of them seem to be a problem of lachem. It's not yours. Yours to use for all types of purposes. Yours that it has a value. Okay. So the Gemara says kosalka daite. The Gemara is assuming at this point man de boy heter achila boy din mam. That each of these reasons are exclusive. They're not inclusive that they both hold of each other. The Gemara is assuming at this point that they're exclusive to their reason and they don't agree with the other reason. And so if you hold the one that needs that the esrog has to be heter achila, has to be valid and entitled to be eaten, has to be valid to be kosher to be eaten. So that opinion isn't worried about if it has a din mama and if it has a value to it or not. Man de boy din mama, the one that says it needs to have a value, loy boy heter achila, doesn't hold of the need to that it has to be valid to eat, but kosher to eat. In other words, as long as it has a value to it, you could use it for something, even though you're not allowed to eat it, it's okay. So that's what it seems like. Each one is holds of their opinion and disagrees with the other opinion. But the Gemara says, but we have a problem. We have a problem. The problem is, Tanan, we learned in a Mishnah, shel truma tameya, that if the esrog is from a truma that was given or supposed to be given to the kohen, but it's tamei, but it became someone impure touched it or moved it or carried it, or there was something that was an oyel or a tent over it. So you have these type of some type of tuma touched it or caused it to be tamei. So the law is that shel truma tameya is pasul. It's invalid. You can't use it for the mitzvah of the daled minim. Now, what's the reason? Why, if it's truma tameya, is it invalid? So the Gemara says, "Bishleim leman diyamar." It's good according to the opinion that when an esrog of arla isn't able to be eaten. That's the reason of arla that it's not good. So here, shapir, this is good in the case of truma that's tameh is also a problem because you're not allowed to eat it. That would be a similar reason. But according to the opinion that it doesn't have a monetary law, meaning it doesn't have a value. So when you have truma tameya, does truma tameya have a value? We know you can't eat truma tameya. Truma that's tamei, that's impure, you can't eat. But what about, can you benefit from it? So the law is that truma tameya has to be burned. But you're allowed to benefit from the fire. So even though it has to be burned, so but the moment according to the opinion that the Orla case is prohibited, the esrog of Orla, the esrog that's from the first 3 years, is prohibited because it doesn't have a value to it. It's ein badin mamoin. So what's going to be by the case of an esrog of truma tameya? Amai, what would be the reason why truma tameya is not valid? That does have a din mamoin. That does have a value to it. It could be used as fuel when you're burning it under your pot of food, your tavshil, your cooked dish, under your dish that's being cooked, that needs to be cooked. You could burn the truma tameya. Basically, the law is that you're not allowed to eat from the truma tameya. And the law is that it has to be burned because it's similar to kudshim that are tameh. They need to be burned, just like kudshim, holy items from the Beis Hamikdash, holy sacrifices that are tameh, they have to be burned. So similar to that, the truma also has to be burned. There's another reason why truma has to be burned, that we're afraid if you don't burn it, you're going to end up coming to eat the truma tameya. So the bottom line is it has to be burned. But you would be allowed to benefit from the fire. So if you're allowed to benefit from the fire, comes out that it does have a value to it. How much does firewood cost? It costs a few bucks. Costs something. So there's a value to firewood. So this, whatever truma, this esrog, it could be, I don't know, I haven't tried burning an esrog and see how well it burns, but maybe some parts of it, I don't know, maybe the skin of it could burn, and you could benefit at least a little from it. I don't know. Hopefully it won't put out the fire. The Gemara is assuming that an esrog that you could burn, you could somehow benefit from it as fuel. Not exactly sure that how that exactly works. With regard, maybe we have anyone who's big into fires, how knows about burning, making fires. You could use fruit to make a fire if that works, but the Gemara is assuming that it does, and that there's a value to that fire, that this item, because it could be used, but you could use it to cook your food. So the Gemara thinks that should be considered a din mamoin, has a value. So then, according to that reason, why is the esrog not kosher to use for an esrog on Sukkah for the Daled Binim if it has a value to it? Yes, it's truma tameya, it's tamei truma, but it has a value. It can't be eaten, but we don't hold about the eating thing. You're right, you can't eat it, but I don't care about the eating thing. I hold that the main thing is that it has a value. It has a value, so therefore it should be kosher. And the Mishnah said it's not kosher; it's puzzle. Mishnah said. So amai he burns it, he ignites it under his tavshil, under his cooked dish, and it's going to cook it. And it should be considered a value to it, and therefore the esrog should be considered, the esrog that's truma tameya, that's tamei, that's impure truma, it should be considered valid for the Daled Minim. And the Gemara says, Elo b'edrachilu kol yama lo pligi deba'inan. So it comes out, rather, we have to switch the way we initially understood this. There is an argument. There's an argument about the reason for the esrog of Arla. Why is the esrog of Arla not valid for the Daled Minim, for the 4 species? Everyone agrees that one of the reasons is that it doesn't have heterachil, that you can't eat an esrog of Arla. You're not allowed to eat it. And an esrog needs to be able to be eaten in order to be yotze the mitzvah of esrog. And so an Arla esrog, is it invalid? For sure. The reason? For sure, one of the reasons is heterachila, you can't eat it. But there might be another reason as well. The whole world, like Pligi, doesn't argue. We need to have a heterachila. that the word lachem means it has to be eligible for your benefit, for you to benefit from all the regular benefits, which one of them would be eating. You have to be able to eat it. And if it's not eligible to be eaten, it's not valid for the daled minim. But there is an argument about the reason of maybe it has to also have a value. Does it need to have a value? Master, one of these rabbis, again, we didn't yet say who's who, but one of the rabbis holds that we do need to have the ability to eat it. We don't need to have, it doesn't need to have a value. It doesn't need to have the law of money, a monetary law, meaning a value to it. That we don't need. Now, that opinion, it doesn't need to have a value, but it does need to have the heter achila. The other opinion says both. Mar Savar din maming nami be'inan. And the other opinion says you need to have both. It needs to be able to be eaten, and it also needs to have a value to it. Now, according to this, what's the reason of truma tamea? Why if an esrog is one of those items, one of the daled minim, the esrog that is truma, but it got tameh, and now you can't use it for the daled minim. And what is the reason for that? Why can't you use it for the daled minim, the esrog that is truma tamea? And the answer is not because it doesn't have a value. It does have a value because everyone agrees. All of these reasons all agree that it has to be able to be eaten. And the esrog of truma tamea is not eligible to be eaten, and therefore that would be the reason there. What's the reason of an esrog of arla? Why can't you use an esrog of arla for the daled minim? For that, you have two reasons, according to some. And according to some, it's only one reason. According to some, you have two reasons. Number one, it's not eligible to be eaten. It's arla. First 3 years, you're not allowed to eat it. And according to another reason, according to some, you have an additional reason that the fact is it doesn't have a value to it. It's also b'hanol. It's also to benefit from. Also to benefit from. It's not called doesn't have a value. The other opinion says no. I don't care if it doesn't have a value to it. That wouldn't ruin anything. The fact that it can't be eaten, that's the only reason. So when it comes to arla, you got two reasons. When it comes to, or two different reasons that some say both, some say only one. And when it comes to the esrog of truma tamea, you only have one reason. That's not, you can't eat it. Now the Gemara says, "My beinayu." What would the difference be in the case of truma tamea? All you have is one of those reasons, and everyone agrees with it. That has to be eligible to be eaten. But if they only argue about if it has a value to it, what would a case be where this would come up and change halacha, where you would have a difference in halacha between the two? So far, we found both cases. It doesn't really change anything. The case of esrog of arla is for sure not valid. Everyone agrees it doesn't have a din achila, so it didn't. You're not able to eat it. Can't use it. And in the case of truma tamea, everyone agrees you can't eat it, so you can't use it. So both of these cases, even though we have an argument if about the din mammon, but what practical difference is there? So the Gemara says, "My beinayu, ika beinayu." There is a difference. Meiser sheni shebi Yerushalayim. Meiser sheni in Yerushalayim. Aliba de Reb Meir. According to Reb Meir, that the Meiser Sheni, if you have Meiser Sheni in Yerushalayim, according to the opinion of Reb Meir, there you would have a special law that this would play a role. This rule would play a role there. What does Reb Meir hold? So Reb Meir holds that Meiser Sheni is called Hashem's money. You know, Meiser Sheni is an interesting type of tithing. Meiser Sheni is called the second tithing. And the second tithing, what do you do with it? You go to Yerushalayim and you rejoice with it. You invite your friends and you eat and you rejoice and you thank Hashem for the great blessings He gave you. So, in a certain sense, it's a very it's your celebration. But in a certain sense, you have to go to Yerushalayim and bring it there and to rejoice over Hashem. So you could call it Hashem's celebration. You know, it's so the money of Meiser Sheni, can you really call it yours, or is it really called Hashem's money? So this is an argument. Reb Meir calls the money of Meiser Sheni, or the fruit of Meiser Sheni, he calls that Mamoin Gavoya. It's money of Hashem. money of Gavoya, of the exalted one, of the high one. Mammon Gavoya, it's mammon of heavens, money of heavens, and meaning it's Hashem's money. And the other opinion, behold, that it's yours. So this opinion of Reb Meir. According to Reb Meir, what comes out is that there is going to be a difference here with Meiser Sheni regarding owning it. Do you own something that's Mammon Gavoya? If it's called Hashem's money, then according to Reb Meir, he holds you don't really own Meiser Sheni. You have a mitzvah to eat the Meiser Sheni of Hashem. You have a mitzvah to go eat that. It's not that it's not that it's yours and you're rejoicing over Hashem and thanking Hashem for it, but it actually has an element of owner. It's considered Hashem's money. If it's considered Hashem's money, it means you don't own it. Are you allowed to eat Meiser Sheni? Of course, you're obligated to eat it. Do you own it? Well, it depends. According to Reb Meir, I don't own it. According to the rabbis, yeah, I own it. So what comes out here is we're going to find the difference in this case where it could be before we had a case that was the opposite. Before we had a case where you can benefit from it. There is a benefit that you could have from it, but you can't eat it. That was a problem. Everyone agrees you can't eat it. You can't use for an esrog. Here we have the opposite case. You can eat it. You're obligated to eat Meiser Sheni. You have to eat it. But is it yours? Do you own it? Are you considered an owner of it? Even though you have to eat it, you don't even own it. You have a mitzvah to eat it, but it's Mammon Gavaya, it's money of Hashem. So this is what the Gemara says here. According to the opinion that the esrog of Arla is not valid because you're not able to eat the esrog because it's Arla, it's the first 3 years. That's the problem with the esrog of Arla. So here, Meiser Sheni, are you able to eat it? Here with Meiser Sheni, you're able to eat it. It's a mitzvah to eat. So it's considered so that you don't have that problem. So should you be able to use it for an esrog? Of course. But Lamanda Amar, according to the opinion that says that it doesn't have a law of money, it doesn't have a value. Meiser Sheni Mammon Gavoyahu. Meiser Sheni is money of Hashem, and therefore it doesn't have a din mammon. And according to that, you're not going to be able to fulfill your obligation with such a esrog. So again, the Mishnah had said, Meiser Sheni b'Yushalayim. The Mishnah had said that when you have Meiser Sheni in Yerushalayim, you shouldn't use it. But if you used it, if not all kosher, so it comes out that it's not so simple. According to Reb Meir, Meiser Sheni in Yerushalayim, it would come out that it's Mammon Gavaya. And if it's Mammon Gavaya, one opinion holds that so if there's an opinion that follows Reb Meir and holds, that it's Mammon Gavaya, that opinion, if they hold also that there's a problem of Arla that you can't use because you don't own, so then the Meiser Sheni will be a problem. You won't be able to fulfill the mitzvah on the first day of Sukkah because you don't own it, because it's called Mammon Gavaya. So the Gemara says, okay. So it comes out that we have a difference, an ika beinayim. There is a difference between these two opinions in halacha. So the Gemara says, Tistayim, it would seem, or we can prove, that the Reb Asi, that we should conclude, I guess would be a better translation. Tistayim, we should be Messiah. We should conclude the Reb Asi, the Omar, Levishain Badin Mamain, that it must be Rav Asi who says that it's Ein Ba Din Mamain, that there is a problem, that something that doesn't have a value is not eligible for the mitzvah of the Dalet Min. It must be Rav Asi. Again, we started off saying we don't know who's who. We don't know which rabbi holds what. We do know that there's an argument between Reb Chia bar Rabban and Rav Asi, but we don't actually know which opinion is which. We don't know where to connecting the lines to this rabbi holds that way and that rabbi holds it. We know the two rabbis and we know the two opinions. We're not sure to connect the rabbi with his opinion. The Gemara now says, but based on the understanding that we've come to, that number one, everyone agrees Ein B'Heter Achila is a problem. And number two, they argue about the Ein B'Din Mammon, if that's a problem. That's where there's an argument about. And now that we've come up with a case where Esrog of Meiser Sheni could be a difference, it comes out that we actually are going to be able to figure out which rabbi holds what. Let's conclude the Rav Asi, that it's Rav Asi, the Amar, that he says, that he holds of this problem. Rav Asi holds of an issue. If it doesn't have a value, you can't use it for, you can't call it lachem, you can't call it yours, you can't use it for an esrog. Tamar Rav Asi, because Rav Asi says, esrog shel meiser sheni, an esrog of meiser sheni, the divrei Reb Meir, according to Reb Meir, again, who holds that Meiser Sheni is Mamoin Gavoyaz, Hashem's money. It's not yours. So it doesn't have a din mammon. Meiser Sheni doesn't have a din mammon. According to Reb Meir, Ein Adam Yaitzi B'Yedei Chavasi B'Yom Tov. You cannot fulfill the mitzvah on Yom Tov with an esrog of Meiser Sheni. Reb Meir holds that. Now, in order to hold that, if someone says you can't fulfill the mitzvah of esrog, of Daled Minim on Yom Tov with Meiser Sheni, with the esrog of Meiser Sheni, if someone holds that, they must hold two things. They must hold, number one, it's Mammon Gavoya, it's Hashem's money. And they also must hold that something that you do not have, that doesn't have a value, you're not Yoitze with. You need to have those two qualifications in order to say that you're not Yoitze. Because if you're missing any one of them, you will fulfill the mitzvah. So it must be that Rav Asi, who says that Reb Meir, who holds Mammon Gavoya, according to him, the law is you are not Yoitze with Meiser Sheni. It must be that Rav Asi holds that for esrog purposes, you need to have a value to it. It has to have a value. In Meiser Sheni, if it's Hashem's, it doesn't have a value. And according to Reb Meir, it's considered Hashem's. And if it's considered Hashem's, it doesn't have a value. And I hold, Rav Asi is basically saying, I hold that in order to fulfill the mitzvah, the Daled Minim, it has to have a value. It has to be considered mine. In order to consider mine, it has to have a value. And so Rav Asi says, you're not Yoitze. So he obviously holds of this reason. When it comes to our law, Rav Asi is going to be the one who says it also needs to have a value to it. Because we see what he says about Meiser Sheni, and if he says that about Meiser Sheni, that reason would apply here as well. What's the reason of Meiser Sheni? 2 points. One is that Meiser Sheni is considered Mammon Gavoya, and the second point is that in order to be Yoitze, the Daled Minim, it has to have a value. And that point is what we're proving, that would apply to Orla also. Doesn't have a value, you can't benefit from it. Doesn't have a value, you can't be Yoitze. So Rav Asi is the one that holds that. Esrog shel meiser sheni l'divrei Reb Meir, he mentions this law that according to Reb Meir, you're not Yoitze yedei chavasa b'yom tov. L'divrei Chachamim, according to the rabbis, Adam Yoitze b'yedei chavasa b'yom tov. A person could fulfill his mitzvah on Yom Tov. Why do the rabbis hold that? According to Rav Asi, the esrog does need to have a monetary value. The esrog has to have a value, and the esrog of Meiser Sheni, according to the rabbis, it says you're Yoitze. How are you Yoitze according to the rabbis? Rav Asi holds it has to have a monetary value. The answer is yes. An esrog of Meiser Sheni has a monetary value according to the rabbis because they hold it's mammon bailim. It's the money of the owners. It's not called Hashem's money. And therefore, it has a monetary value. And therefore, but even though Rav Asi holds that it has to have a monetary value, but according to the rabbis, you could still fulfill the mitzvah because it's considered your money, so it has a monetary value. Meir held it's mammon gavoya, but the Chachamim hold it's considered mammon hedyet. It's mammon hedyet. It's considered the money of the regular person. It's not considered Hashem's money. and therefore it would work to stayim. This concludes. This is a good way. This proves that that's correct. That Rav Asi must hold of this reason. So what comes out that we know, what does Reb Chia bar Ravin hold? Reb Chia bar Ravin holds only the reason of Ein Ba Heter Achila. He doesn't agree with that reason of Ein Ba Din Mamayin. So that would be basically the conclusion of this little piece of Gemara. The Gemara continues and says, Gufa, we just said, Amar Rav Asi said, Esrik shel Meiser Sheni, an Esrik of Meiser Sheni l'divrei Reb Meir. According to Reb Meir, Ein Adam Yitzchok Yidei Chavasav Yom Tov, l'divrei Chachamim, Adam Yitzchok Yidei Chavasav Yom Tov. That according to Reb Meir, you don't fulfill the mitzvah. Again, the reason is because he calls it Mammon Gavoya. And of course, Rav Asi, you have to add in that Rav Asi holds that it has to have a monetary value. And so you have both points. According to Reb Meir, because you have both points, you're not yotzei. But according to the rabbis, you could fulfill the mitzvah with Meiser Sheni. Why? Because it's called Mammon Bailam and Mammon Hedyet. It's considered the money of the owner, and therefore you could fulfill the mitzvah of Esra, Daled Mina. So the Gemara says that Matzah Shel Meiser Sheni, the same thing would apply. Matzah Shel Meiser Sheni, the divrei of if you have matzah. And it's Meiser Sheni matzah. Divrei Meir, Ein Adam Yitzchok Yidei Chavasav Pesach. You can't fulfill the mitzvah on Pesach. The obligation of eating matzah on Pesach. Matzah on Pesach also has to be yours. And according to that, Meir would hold you're not fulfilling the mitzvah.
Would you have to burn it if you can't eat it? Would you have to burn it, or they consider this is matzah that's valid for Pesach?
No. Why would you burn it? No, just it's Meiser Sheni matzah. Can you get the mitzvah out of it? No. Why would you burn it? No, of course not. No, it's Meiser Sheni. You eat in Yerushalayim. But can you be yotzei the mitzvah? You have to have a different matzah for the mitzvah. So the thing is, according to Reb Meir, you're not yotzei Yidei Chavas. According to Divrei Chachamim, Adam Yotzei Yidei Chavas b'Pesach. You could fulfill the mitzvah of Pesach. Isa shel Meiser Sheni. If you have dough of Meiser Sheni, the Divrei Reb Meir Patur min Challah. If you have dough, it's patur from separating challah because it's not yours. In the Divrei Chachamim chayav is b'challah. According to the rabbis, you would be chayav in separating challah because it's yours. Okay, we're gonna stop here. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Sei gesund.
Thank you, Rabbi.
How could Rabbi Meir be correct? The Torah says you're allowed to change your actual fruit into money, and you bring the money with you to Yerushalayim. It says in Deuteronomy, right?
Yeah, right.
Okay. So if it says, how could Rabbi Meir say that that's not your money?
What do you mean? It's not. It's not your money because it's Hashem's. You're going to eat it in Yerushalayim. You're limited with where you could eat it. You're not even required even to eat the exact substance. You can convert it into money. Okay, but it's still not yours. It's like if someone sent you on a mission. Okay, carry this until here, change it over, sell it there, and then go. Still not yours. It's Hashem's. He's just telling you the plan. You want to switch it over? I don't mind.
The simple understanding of that.
How about someone gives you shliach mitzvah money, and he says, and you don't have to use this dollar. You can switch it for another dollar. So what are you gonna say? Is it your money? It's not yours.
It says specifically you're taking the maaser from your own things. The maaser is from your own produce.
Yeah, but it becomes Hashem's. When you separate it, it becomes Hashem's. Yeah.
It doesn't make any logical sense.
We'll have to talk about it more, but I got to run.
Okay,
Have a good day.
Rabbi.